Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Elsa Anderson, the Queen's former press secretary, and Ken Worf, Princess Diana's former bodyguard. Thank you so much for joining me on this week of weeks. Let's start with Elsa, actually. Now, I'd like to know this, Elsa. When you were press secretary, why weren't you giving me loads of stories? Harry says the palace was always feeding stories to journalists like me.
Oh, well, Camilla, in the 13 years I worked in the royal household as the Queen's press secretary, there was not one occasion when I briefed against another member of the royal family to promote my own. So I'm afraid, as much as you would have liked me to have spoon-fed you all sorts of exclusives, that was not my bag.
Now, Elsa, you can't possibly be suggesting that Harry might be telling some fibs in this book.
I'm just talking about my own experiences, Camilla, and
yes.
I can again just say I never happened on my watch. And actually, the Queen wouldn't sanction it. The Queen would not want her members of staff briefing against people in her own family. That's just not on. So you would not count doing that.
Ken, let's bring you in on this. I mean, your reactions, you knew these princes very well when they were little. You saw the dynamic between them. Have you been shocked by some of the revelations?
I actually think that, the book Spare, I mean, what I've read so far is actually, it's rather pitiful because I'm rather saddened by it for him. I'm saddened by it for the royal family that, this is an episode, a story that they didn't need. And, people talk about revelations. And actually what we're hearing is a sort of an airing of his problems publicly that include his father, that include his brother and other members of the royal family. And like any airing of anyone's problems, any chance of a reconciliation seems now to be faded fast, because if you're going to reconcile a problem, you need to do it privately. You don't do it like this. And there are so many things that have come out of this. I mean, of course, I remember them both as two very young children. And, that was a very pleasant experience. It was a privilege for me.
Was there this sibling rivalry from a young age?
Well, there was. I mean, I went there when Harry was 3. William was 5, 6. And Harry was always the sort of the court jester, the entertainer. And, understandably, in any sort of, there's always going to be sibling rivalry. And William, understandably, was a bit jealous of Harry's popularity. But that was then. But, be under no mistake that even at that age, Harry, as a 5-year-old, I remember, was clearly under the knowledge that he was never going to be king. I mean, there's that interesting story that I remember travelling to Highgrove one weekend, which we did, and there's Diana driving. The nanny of the late Olga Pound is refereeing this fight on the back seat. And suddenly, out of nowhere, Harry sort of leans across to William and said, "It's all right for you. You'll be king one day and I won't, therefore I can do what I want."
Yes.
Now, that was a 5, 6-year-old.
But you've hit on something there, because Harry clearly feels he can do what he wants. When you were working in the royal household, Elsa, did you get the impression of this man raging against the machine? There seems to be something in him saying that he felt like he was a spare wheel to William and Kate.
I never got that impression at all. And actually, I maybe want to counter that and think, if you're not the heir to the throne, maybe that gives you more freedom to live your life.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have been able to go to Afghanistan on 2 tours if he was the heir to the throne, presumably. So I think, actually, it took the pressure off him a bit while he was growing up to be that second son. And do you know what, Camilla, in what family isn't there rivalry between siblings?
Yeah.
I know myself. I'm sure you do.
But he paints this picture of people like you having to manage these complex relationships, diary clashes, personality clashes. He paints a picture of Charles and indeed William, and by association, Catherine, as being cold and unfeeling people that didn't hug. I mean, I appreciate you were staff and not family, but is that how you found these royals?
Never. And I have to say, I have been hugged by a member of the royal family before, female member.
Are you able to tell us which one?
Absolutely not. So I never found any member of the royal family other than warm, caring, considerate and helpful. I mean, it was just an honour and a privilege to work in that organisation, and I would say that for the staff as well. They must be feeling extraordinarily bruised over all these allegations. As I said, I couldn't have worked for a more professional, loyal, honest group of people. It was a privilege.
Ken, a lot's been made of this. Is it a boast? Is it just a statement of fact that he's killed these 25 Taliban fighters? I know you came into the police force as a cadet. I know you were SAS trained. I'm not sure if you've ever killed anyone, Ken, or whether you'd ever tell me. What do you think are the security implications of what he's said about the Taliban?
Well, I think this is probably one of the most serious aspects of this book. And, I don't think we should take this lightly. We've read over the last 2 or 3 days a number of leading military personnel that have actually condemned his actions. And I think it was incredibly foolish. Because,
does it put him and his bodyguards
at greater risk? But I think it does. I mean,
risk?
let's be quite frank about this. We've already had statements now from Afghanistan. And this, the sort of the popular media now, this has actually gone global. And, I was talking just a moment ago about, look what happened to Salman Rushdie recently. Nobody anticipated an attack like that. So I think Harry now and his security, wherever that might be, seriously needs to reassess his own security and that of his family, because we live in very dangerous times. So to make that statement was an incredibly rude one to make, which brings on the question of why didn't someone really sort of advise him, go through this, prove this book, and identify the areas that were likely to cause him a problem. And that clearly didn't happen, but it was a very, very bad
Are you
mistake.
worried about the public as well, bearing in mind that there's a major royal event in the coronation happening in May?
Well, already, the security arrangements of that are well underway, and that will now become part of the problem. And then it brings into question, will Harry be invited to the coronation? That we don't know exactly that. There are rumours perhaps he won't be. But it will. There are serious implications of that statement that seems to me to have now dominated the world's media, and rightly so. It's put aside, the fight in Nottingham Cottage. It's put aside the falling on the dog board. I mean, we can laugh at that, but the actual implication surrounding the fact that he shot 25 Afghan whatever was a huge mistake on his part.
And also briefly, Ken, before I come back to you, Ailsa, you oversaw the arrangements around Princess Diana's funeral in 1997. Reflecting on it, do you think it was wrong that those princes walked behind that coffin?
Well, I think it was very difficult for Harry. But I think what you have to remember here, Camilla, is that there was what they call a sense of duty here. This is what happens in state funerals for members of the British royal family. This is all part of being royal. I think personally it was probably wrong for a child of that age of 13. But it was part of his duty, very difficult as it may be. But one thing I would like to say that, there's always been a lot of criticism about his father. There's no doubt in my mind, or being on the other side, as it were, working for the princess, that I always found the prince to be an extraordinary, forgiving man. And one thing that I see now is that he would like to find a way and would wish to find a way to reconcile himself.
Yeah, that's in the papers this morning, this suggestion that he wants to make peace.
There's no doubt about that.
Very, very briefly, Ken, Diana's thoughts on this? She'd be devastated, wouldn't she?
Well, she would be devastated, but Diana herself did exactly the same thing. So were she alive, she would say to Harry, look, I think you're making a big mistake.
Yes.
Listen, look what I did.
Ailsa, you worked with her professionally, you knew her well. There's been reports in the papers today and yesterday saying this devastated the Queen in her final years. I mean, what do you think she made of all this?
I think she would be absolutely devastated. What the Queen wanted was an institution to go forward, and I have absolutely no doubt the institution will go forward. This is not a crisis. I mean, we've seen an abdication in 1936. That was a crisis. This is not a crisis. This is a bump in the road, shall we say. But I do think this would have affected the Queen horribly. She'd lost her husband, who was her strength and stay, and now she's got this awful rift with her grandchildren and her son.
I mean, the people that you speak to at the palace still, I'm sure you still have friends there. Do they say that it did adversely affect her as she was in her final weeks and months, do you think?
I think it would be something certainly discussed, and you can see whether it was her lack of mobility, but in the last year or so of her reign, she was winding down. She was not doing as much as she did previously, and I think this family row, blatantly public family row, was bound to have an effect on her mentally and physically.